I'd plug his injection system. And then I'd drive by and go, you know? Oh, God, why didn't you do that? And then it hit me. I don't know. Why haven't I done it to you? Oh, golly. God's a God of mercy. God's a God of love. God's a holy God, and He judges sin. Understand. But He's patient because He wants to give people a chance to respond, to repent. But, as becomes very clear in the next few verses, the next few lines, He does judge sin. Listen to what it says beginning in the last part of verse 14. He's talking about the day of the Lord. In it the warrior cries out bitterly. A day of wrath is that day. A day of trouble and distress. A day of destruction and desolation. A day of darkness and gloom. A day of clouds and thick darkness. A day of trumpet and battle cry against the fortified cities and the high corner towers. I will bring distress on men, so that they will walk like the blind. You notice the words that Zephaniah uses there? Bitterly, wrath, trouble, distress, destruction, desolation, darkness, gloom, thick darkness. The picture that he paints here is one of anguish, distress, destruction. And indeed, when the Babylonians invaded Judah, that's exactly what they left in their wake. Absolute and total devastation. That first line there, in it the warrior cries out bitterly. Many times we're tempted to read that and think that we're talking about the Babylonian warriors. But we're not. We're talking about the Jewish warriors. Ones who saw what was happening and were powerless to do anything about it. I'm reading a book right now. It's called Red Storm on the Reich. And it's about the final days of the Third Reich. And, you know, while I'm glad that Hitler's Third Reich failed and fell, listen to, I just want to read a few excerpts from you that were written by both German and Russian soldiers of what they saw. It says, on the streets lay the bodies of old people, women and children. They were totally despoiled, and some of them were frozen together in grisly heaps. Others were found as charred corpses in the smoke-blackened ruins. In the station there still stood carriages of the train, which had been surprised by the Russians at Megiddo a couple of weeks earlier. On the carriage floors, the Germans found the bodies of women of every age, lying with their clothes ripped open. This one says, never had I seen so many bodies, civilian, German, and Russian soldiers, but especially the Russians in great heaps, lying this way and that on top of one another. Between the corpses were strewn dead horses, the overturned carts of the refugees, bogged down military transport, burned out cars, weapons and equipment. It was depressing enough to see the soldiers. We had had nothing to eat for days and were totally exhausted, but the faces of the women were indescribable. I saw mothers cast their infants into the sea because they could carry them no further. This one says this. The enemy opened with every infantry weapon of all kind, mortars, artillery, and Katyushas against this ill-led and confused mob of soldiers, party officials, and civilians. The result was a frightful bloodbath. Sudal was badly wounded and shortly afterwards expired on the spot. Groscher fell together with a number of other party functionaries. Heartbreaking scenes were played out among the civilians. Many of them tried to drag their badly wounded relatives back into the city and were themselves struck down. What horrendous scenes have taken place in human history. That's what Zephaniah is describing to the nation of Judah. And indeed, that is the horror that Babylon visited upon them. A grisly scene, one of distress, one of darkness, one of gloom, one of just thick darkness, of that battle cry. The enemy's all around. There's nowhere to turn. Even if I go to the fortified cities, if I go to the high towers, they all fall. What a terrible scene. Take a look at the latter part of verse 17. It said, their blood will be poured out like dust, and their flesh like dung. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to deliver them. There's nothing that they could do. That which they had turned to, instead of in allegiance to God, that wouldn't be able to do anything for them. What a horrendous scene. Why? Why could such a thing happen? Why would such a thing God allow to come upon these people? Take a look right in the middle of verse 17, and God answers that. Right in the midst of this devastation that he's describing, he says this, because they have sinned against the Lord. Why? Because they had sinned against the Lord. Isn't that harsh on the part of God? Isn't that terrible for God just to, be so petty and arbitrary that, he's going to strike out at them? All because they did not listen to him? Well, maybe that's how you and I would be. Being a parent, it's good to be a parent, right? I like being a parent more than I did like being a child. Because as a parent, I can use the powerful words, because I said so. As a child, I never liked to hear that, okay? As a child, it was, you can't do this. Why? Because I said so. And I'd say, well, you're just being unfair. You're just being mean. You're just being cruel. You just don't understand. As a parent, I tell my child, because I say so. And I'm not being mean. I'm not being cruel. I'm not trying to be unfair. I really am trying to understand. But as a parent, I understand that I want to do what's best for my child. Now, my child may not understand that, right? But I do. My experience, my life choices have shown me that you walk that path, you're going to get hurt, and I'm going to protect you, and you may not understand, but someday you will. So why would we think God is any the less? God's not arbitrary and saying, just because you haven't worshiped me, I'm going to get you. That's not his point. God is holy. Remember I said that? God is holy. He does what is right and just and pure and good. There's no sin in him. There's no darkness. There's no wickedness. There's no selfishness. Well, let me back that up. Yeah, there is selfishness in God. God is concerned about himself, but it's selfishness unmarred by sin. It's not like the selfishness that I have. Sit down to watch TV. I wrestle my wife for the remote. We're down on the floor. She gives me an elbow. Oh! She gets off of the remote because she wants to watch 90210. Oh! I don't want to watch that. She wants to watch. I don't want to watch that. So I jump around the couch again and I take the remote from her and I run off and I put it on football. And then I quickly put it back on 90210 and give her the remote back. Okay. She wants what she wants. I want what I want. That's bad selfishness. But that's not God. God doesn't go, I want my way because I want my way. God says, I want my way because I know that that's best and right and pure and just and good. I don't want you to have your way because I know that it will lead you to pain and harm and destruction. And God, in his great mercy, as I said earlier, warned them and warned them and warned them and warned them. And they continue down that path. And then the punishment fit the crime. Sometimes we think it a good thing when a person does their own thing. And sometimes it is. But when somebody goes contrary to the will of God, God's already laid out the best thing. And to take that other path leads one into a grave and damning place. These are the people who some of them threw their child into the brazen, heated arms of the god Molech, alive. The crime fit the punishment. God wasn't being arbitrary and mean, but the crime fit the punishment. Extreme times call for extreme measures, right? Don't we say that? If I go to the doctor and my leg is black and green from the knee down, I'm going to expect the doctor to do a little more than give me some salve and a Band-Aid. I might not like it when the doctor says to me, Jim, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to amputate. But what do I want the doctor to do above all else? To save my life, correct? And if I've got to lose my life to save it, or lose my leg to save it, then given the extremity, literally, that may need to be the thing to do. The doctor could say to me, Jim, I warned you. I told you. You needed to take care of that sore. You needed to have it taken care of, and you didn't listen to me, and this is what we have left. Why do we look at God differently in this situation and say, boy, God's just being mean. God's just being wicked? No. It was the Babylonians who would be mean and wicked. And it was the Israelites, the people of Judah, that put themselves in that position to where it was necessary of God to move on them in this respect. They placed themselves in opposition to God. And as we like to say, they sowed the wind and they reaped the whirlwind. Take a look at the last part of verse 18. Paints a pretty drastic picture there. But then he says this, beginning, about 3 lines in on verse 18. On the day of the Lord's wrath, it's kind of the closing, but also a transition. He says, neither will their silver or their gold will be able to deliver them on the day of the Lord's wrath. But it's not a period, it's a semicolon, it's a transition statement. He says, and all the earth will be devoured. Now his tone begins to change. Now he goes from just talking about Judah up here, much like he did in Matthew chapter 24. If you've ever read that, we read a portion of it in our congregational reading. The disciples asked him a question about the